All right, hi guys. Sorry for the delay. It's been a bit of a hectic week, but your exams are now posted. So, I apologize for the delay. Normally, I like a 2 week turnaround, but right now, between four classes, one of which is a double section, so effectively five classes, 180 students, no TAs, so it takes me a little bit longer to get stuff graded. That said, I was really pleased with the exams. Just some comments that I would make. Essays, remember to do both. Remember to be as thorough and detailed as possible. If you need more time, let me know. But I mean, the idea is you should be taking notes on this. So, I mean, being the essays being open note, it should be a matter of just transcribing your notes between the lecture and the books. For the IDs, remember, I need, who's involved, where it is, when it takes place, give me the year and only the year. What it is, give me details, give me the significance. I know it's kind of hard to do in 25 minutes, but again, you should be studying all of this. You should be making ID lists, all that fun stuff. And I mean, this is an upper division course. I am going to expect a fair amount of detail. Remember, I do have the exam score replacement policy, so I mean, if you are not pleased with your exam, please, study hard for the second one. And if the second one's higher, it will override. Another question I have is, and I don't know if this is, something you guys would be interested in, if this were an actual semester-long course, well, I guess it is a semester-long course. If this were a traditional, we were all in Stillwater, I would maybe try to float the idea of a movie night. When I teach a night class, I would sometimes show a movie. I could do that in my short classes to give everybody a break, like the 10-day when we do this. I did it in my Cold War class. We actually got together, we watched Doctor Strangelove and James Bond and offered some extra credit. I know not everybody is in Stillwater, so if this were to happen, obviously I would make something where non-Stillwater people could get some extra credit. But I was just wondering if that might be something you guys would be interested in. If it's so, let me know. If there's interest in it, we might have it. I could reserve a room on campus. But I ask, because I've got like a new movie, like actually what I just got today, Talvisota. It's a Finnish movie about the Winter War. Though why on the back, on the top, they used a scene from Saving Private Ryan, I have no idea. But it just seems to me there's a lot of good non-American World War II movies out there that, I mean, for a lot of us, we've seen all sorts of World War II movies out there. But most of them either, about Americans or made by America. There's, a lot of British, a lot of German. I've got some Italian. Quite a few Japanese, and not even necessarily confined to what we consider the Second World War. I mean, we could do. There's one on YouTube that I'm really excited to watch, the 100 Regiments Offensive, I think is what it's called. But it's Second Sino-Japanese War. So, I mean, all sorts of stuff like that. So I just want to put the feeler out there. If that's something you would be interested in, let me know. I assume it would be, if it's like when we did on the for the Cold War class, I would find a night midweek, probably Wednesday or Thursday, whatever people would be available. Have rooms 6:37, something like that. Just come in, watch one, maybe two movies, talk about it. Then there'd be some extra credit bonus points in it for you if you were to both show and then do the paper, something like that. We will have an extra credit assignment I will post this week that involves cartoons. I'm going to destroy your childhoods because, hey, I would be remiss in my job as a historian if I didn't. But, having just gotten this movie today, it just, the idea has been kicking around in my head, so I just thought I would, put that out there. What we're going to do today is we're going to shift away, what's going on in Russia, Eastern Front. If we flash back, I'm sorry it's been a while. I hope you've enjoyed the documentaries. But, we last lecture left off with the Russian counteroffensive, approximately December 6, 1941. And the next day, obviously, December 7 is, the attack on Pearl Harbor. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about Japanese and American relations. We're going to talk about how the United States drifts closer to the war. And we're going to end up with, the destruction of the empires in the Pacific. If we look at Japanese-American relations, initially they're cordial. I mean, remember 1863, Commodore Matthew Perry, forcibly opens up Japan for trade. And there's going to be a number of wars between the Western powers and Japan over the issues of things like that. But Japan is unique amongst the Asian countries in that it rapidly industrializes and does so very, very quickly. In the 1860s, it's very much still a but as we have alluded to, by 1904, it is a fully militarized power with an army based on that of Prussia, now Imperial Germany, with a navy built in Britain that looks like British ships that are trained by the British. They're able to defeat the Russians. So we see economic cooperation, we see some military assistance. We're going to see things like this after the 1923 earthquake. Obviously, the United States is going to rally around this idea of, send stuff in to help Japan. But Japan becomes more and more militarized. And what we're going to see is in the 1920s, when their economy tanks in response to the Great Depression, we've already alluded to this, they become militarized and they embrace a sort of fascism on their own. And for them, the issue with Japan is not one of necessarily Lebensraum or living space, or it's not necessarily, in the case of, say, Italy, of needing to make, we need to make Italy great again. Sorry, I gotta have the dig it Donald Trump, right? But what we're gonna see, and the funny thing is I'm making fun of Trump and I'm a Republican, but hey, whatever, is Japan is an island nation. Okay, you're like, well, duh. But if you look, this nation does not have resources necessary for modern war. Okay, in the 1880s, all right, you need wood, you need some steel, you need gunpowder, that's about it. But now you need aluminum, tin, oil, coal, all of this stuff, and Japan does not have it. So Japan, which has been embarked since 1937 in the Second Sino-Japanese War, all of this fighting and conquest, okay, what we're going to see is it has to rely on other sources for its raw materials. It's importing stuff from Britain. It's importing stuff primarily from the United States. But as the United States drifts more and more to war, especially with Germany, that supply becomes threatened. By 1940, the United States establishes the first ever peacetime draft. You can be drafted into the military, and there's not even a state of war. By mid-1941, American ships are escorting British convoys about halfway across the Atlantic to cut down on the strain for Royal Navy ships. By the summer of 1941, okay, there is an undeclared naval war in the Atlantic. We're going to see American destroyers engage German submarines. A German submarine on Halloween night, 1941, will torpedo and sink the USS Reuben James, spawning a Woody Guthrie song. Do you remember the names on the good old Reuben James? And what we're going to see, what all this means is by 1941, all pretense of neutrality is gone. We are drifting to war not with Japan, but with Germany. But the issue for Japan is if we come into the war on the side of Germany, we may not continue to supply Japan, their ally, and the Axis powers with materials. So now their source is threatened. Now, there are some conspiracy theories out there that will try to tell you that Pearl Harbor was an inside job. That Pearl Harbor, the Navy, historically, the Pacific Fleet had been based at Mare Island, California. And the thought had been, okay, we're going to, forward deploy to Hawaii to make it more easily attackable, so the Japanese would attack it, thus bringing us into the war. No, that is completely stupid, and here's why. One, Franklin Roosevelt is a Navy man. He was Undersecretary of the Navy. He helped build this Navy. The battleships at Pearl Harbor in December 7, 1941 were all built during his term. Okay, these are First World War era battleships, with the exception of the Maryland and the West Virginia. Tennessee and California technically post World War I, but they were building during World War I. Okay. Second, FDR was more concerned with Nazi Germany. A naval war in the Pacific does not guarantee a war in Europe. So from that standpoint alone, it makes no sense why we would go to war against Japan, hoping it would trigger a war with Germany. If we're going to do that, we're going to just keep doing all sorts of, send American destroyers to protect convoys. There's also the issue, and I don't fault guys like Erich Topp, the German submarine ace who was responsible for sinking the Reuben James. Why? Remember the destroyers for bases deal, okay, that we're actually about to talk about, okay? With destroyers for bases, the idea we're going to make 99 Lear, I don't know what a Lear is, but we make one. The British make 99-year leases on bases in the Caribbean. So in response, we give them 50 old World War I destroyers. Well, guess what? This is what they look like. Okay, a German U-boat, unless he could see the flag, could not tell if this was a British or American destroyer. But if it's escorting a convoy, err on the side of caution. Okay, we are starting to shed our pretense of neutrality. And we see that with the introduction of Lend-Lease. Remember the Neutrality Acts. We said, okay, if you want to buy goods, you have to pay for it in cash. You have to send your own ships, cash and carry. Okay, but it wants to influence the course of the war before the United States ever gets in. So, under the adoption of Lend-Lease, the idea is the president can lend or lease any military equipment to any nation he sees fit for the protection of the United States. So what this meant, at least, okay, Britain can buy 1,000 Sherman tanks. Or we can lend it. We can just give them, if you're lending, okay, you're letting somebody borrow, we can just give them 1,000 Sherman tanks and they will give it to us. They'll give it back to us when they're done with it. Hang on just a second. This thing is all sorts of shaky. Looks like there's an earthquake. Now, to quote Senator Robert Taft, this is the equivalent of chewing gum. You loan somebody your chewing gum, you don't expect to get it back. If you did, it's kind of gross, but ew. The thing is, if we loan Britain Sherman tanks, we don't want them back when we get them. The idea is to covertly support the war because Britain cannot afford to pay for this stuff. In many cases, Britain can't afford to ship this stuff. Britain needs help. And eventually, so do all the free allied nations, free Poland, free France, all that. And eventually, so does Russia. This is how we can help the war effort. But what this means is, again, we have cast off all pretense of neutrality well before we actually declare war. Now, if that's what's going on a larger scale, for us, for the United States, the focus is in the Pacific. Okay, if you look, the American Empire by 1903, we've got Midway, we've got Hawaii, we've got Wake, we've got Guam, we've got the Philippines, we've got people stationed in China. Okay, we've had gunboats on the Yangtze River since the 1920s. And this puts us in direct competition with Japan. Okay, if we step back and think, okay, the Spanish-American War is focused on Cuba, okay, out here. But what's actually going to happen, this gives us a Pacific Empire. And that means from 1902, we have been in direct competition with Japan. We create what we're going to call War Plan Orange, okay? Which, if I say War Plan Orange, if you hang on just a second, I record these in my kind of studio office. War Plan Orange. All right, we make games out of this. Actually, I've actually made my own war game out of this. Made quite a bit of money, too. But what we, in a sense, basically say is we realize that this can spawn a trade war with Japan. Okay? And now if Japan needs those resources, if Japan needs to get stuff, if Japan doesn't want a big power right there, we are now the preeminent threat. Britain, okay, you've got Hong Kong, but that's away from Japan. That's not that big. Russia, there is no real Russian Pacific Fleet anymore. But the Philippines, our main colonial possession, is right next to Japan. And our interest with them sour after the failed open door policy in China. The idea, okay, we're going to have equitable trading in China, that we're going to try to, economically compete with Britain, with France, with Japan. So we are at odds. And then we keep our interest in China after the Second Sino-Japanese War begins. So that in 1937, we get what's called the Panay Incident. And we've already alluded to this some. But with the Panay Incident, okay, we've had this military presence in China since 1854. Our stuff is in Nanking, so as the Nanking massacre is going on, our stuff is right there. And on December 12, 1937, the USS Panay is bombed and sunk by Japanese aircraft. And yeah, it's caught on camera. I believe I already mentioned this, but Pantless Gunner, the guy who, sleeping tackle out and he doesn't have time to put his jeans on before, going into battle. Oh, if you learn nothing else from this class, don't sleep naked. Somebody will find out. But what this means, why this is so important, is one, this almost triggers war. But it shows that American interests in China are competing with Japanese interests in China. And this is a major problem because by now, Britain has the first largest navy. We have the second. Japan has the third. And what all this means is if there's going to be a war, okay, people are thinking already it's going to be over the Philippines, and people are still influenced both by Mahan, by the Battle of Tsushima, which was the final decisive battle, May the 27th, 1905, in the Russo-Japanese War, and by the Battle of Jutland. People are still hoping that there's going to be a clash of dreadnoughts that will be more decisive than Jutland. So if we look at the Japanese Navy, okay, it is modern. It is large. It is the third largest. By December 7th, they have 10 battleships, a few more under construction. They have 10 aircraft carriers, 6 fleet carriers, large carriers like the Akagi, the Kaga, Shokaku, Zuikaku, those, but also smaller, light aircraft carriers, typically built off of merchant ships. They have excellent cruisers, so excellent they're actually bigger than they're supposed to be. What the Japanese would do is build a heavy cruiser to treaty limitations, right? They would arm it with 6-inch guns just to save weight, and then once they renounce the treaty, rip off the 6-inch guns, pop 8-inch guns on there, and have a 13,000, 14,000 ton heavy cruiser when the treaty said, oh, actually, it's only supposed to be 10,000 tons. And by treaty, of course, I mean the Washington Naval and the London Naval treaties. If you look at the United States Navy, we have more battleships. Forgetting to count, but okay, hang on. We've got 2 New York, 2 Nevada, 2 Pennsylvania, 2 Tennessee. So that's 8 plus 3 New Mexico. That's 11 plus 3 Colorado. So that's 14 plus the Arkansas. So we've got 15 battleships with more under construction. They have 10. Again, this is the 5-5-3-3-3 ratio coming back. We have more battleships. But carriers, we have fewer. The Langley, our first aircraft carrier, has been reconverted to a seaplane carrier. So we only have, by December 1941, Lexington, Saratoga, Enterprise, Ranger, and Yorktown. We have 5 carriers. Of that, 2 Lexington, Saratoga are old converted battle cruisers, and Ranger is so small she will never be operationally used in the Pacific. She's too small for carrier battles. So now, the Japanese have more carriers, we have more battleships, but there's one other issue. Our Navy has to be divided between 2 oceans. The Japanese can concentrate, for obvious reasons, in the Pacific. So what this actually means is December 7, 1941, in the Pacific, we have Saratoga, Lexington, and Enterprise. We have 3 carriers. They have 10. They have 10 battleships. We have 9. Okay, we have the 8 at Pearl Harbor, including the battleship Oklahoma, and we have the Colorado in California. We have 9 battleships to 10, 3 carriers to 10. The United States Navy in the Pacific is overwhelmed. There's also the issue, because we're escorting convoys, by the way, here is the Japanese Navy, part of it at anchor. And again, here's their big carriers, number of battleships. Um, because we're escorting convoys in the Atlantic, we're having to transfer a lot of our destroyers to the Atlantic. That means that in smaller ships, the Japanese have an advantage. Most of our destroyers, in the by the numbers, are those old World War I 4-stack destroyers. Of course, I'm not going to find it if I do. Stuff like the Reuben James. This is what the majority of our destroyers look like. But the Japanese Navy, again, it's modern. They've retired most of their World War I destroyers. They have good, heavily armed destroyers. Not to mention, the Japanese have better tactics. They have better torpedoes. They have better night fighting capability. We have technology. We're going to have radar. Not yet, but by late 42 we will. But the Japanese have all of the advantages. But it's with that, and here I include a cartoon from Dr. Seuss, that we see, the United States begin the push. Okay, the Second Sino-Japanese War had all but stalemated by 1941. Literally, it's going nowhere. But the issue is the Japanese keep wanting to do this, but again, they don't have oil, steel, tin, rubber, all of this stuff. They have to import it. So public opinion in the United States swings against them. The Chinese suffer horrendous losses. The Poles, the Soviets, the Chinese. There's the three nations that suffer the most in the Second World War. So what happens is on July the 24th, Japan seizes Vietnam, French Indochina. Now, Indochina had been controlled by Vichy France, and the Germans basically said, yeah, if you guys need it, go ahead and take it. The idea is so they can expand the war in China. 2 days later, the United States frees all of Japanese assets in the United States. What does that mean for Japan? 3/4 of their trade stops. 88% of their imported oil stops. Okay? And now what we say is, look, if you withdraw from China, end the war, we'll be perfectly happy to turn the spigot back on. We will, what is it that Prof said? If you freeze something, you thaw. But have you ever heard somebody say you thaw the assets? It's unfreeze. Excuse me while I drink my unfrozen water. But the Japanese look at it from their perspective. I'm not condoning it, okay? Bear in mind, I'm not condoning the Japanese. I try to be as unbiased as possible. But my grandfather, and I will talk this when we get that, was literally about 5 feet away from being killed by a kamikaze pilot. And I had one of my grandmother's cousins was on Corregidor, was on Bataan, and survived the Bataan Death March only to die in a prisoner of war camp. Okay, so if I can be unbiased, you can be unbiased. But look at it from the Japanese perspective. To them, what right does the United States have to dictate their foreign policy? Okay, if they want to go to war with China, what business of it is ours to say, yes, you can, no, you can't? This is kind of the problems, and we see this today with a globalized economy. We don't want our oil used to kill Chinese people. We don't want our steel to make Japanese dive bombers that will bomb Pearl Harbor. Oops. We don't want any of this. But for the Japanese, okay, and then what is it? There's the story of Pappy Boynton, the commander of, I think VMF 214, the Black Sheep Squadron, will be shot down and captured. And so why are you fighting? And he said, well, you bombed Pearl Harbor, da-da-da-da-da. And his Japanese guard said, well, okay, you say we started the war. Yeah. If you starve us and we act out to get what we need, are we really the guilty party? That is how they see it. For them, for the Japanese, the Second World War was about them trying to get the resources they need. And, we just happen to get in the way. Is that true? Not really, but understand that's at least how they see it. Japan is dependent on resources. And if, they can't import it from us, they're going to get it from somewhere else. And that's what really triggers the Second World War. Now, if we look at the peace, the Japanese over and over said that they wanted peace. They've got a peace negotiator in the United States. We've got our guys in Japan. We're trying to hash this out. But the issue comes over what we call the Southern Resource Area. And it occurs to me, I don't have a map here, so I'm going to go all the way back. So hopefully, what the Southern Resource Area is, if we go all the way back, this is what I mean by the Southern Resource Area. I mean, Indochina, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Java, Borneo, okay? These are the places they have, this is where the world supply of rubber is. They have a huge supply of oil. They have tin, manganese, iron ore, all the stuff Japan needs for modern warfare. Okay, I'm actually going to stop on this map. Everything here is where they need. But imagine the Japanese in a line coming down. Boom, they hit the Philippines. This is where the attack on Pearl Harbor comes from. They knew if they invaded to take the resources they need, then what's going to happen is the United States will declare war. The Japanese, will find themselves in a war with the United States. So if they can attack Pearl Harbor, destroy the American Pacific Fleet, then the plan is offensive, defensive tactics. Go in, invade the Southern Resource Area, get what you need, establish a defensive perimeter. Then by the time the United States is ready to take on a war, maybe they'll just quit because it'll be too tough. That's what they hope. Now, I wish I could make jokes. I got a couple I could probably do. But Pearl Harbor, it's not, for the United States, it's not really something you can joke about. It's something that every American should know, which is exactly why I had a student last semester tell me, it was for a freshman level class, the exam literally covered World War I to World War II, that Pearl Harbor happened in the spring of 1962. I just imagine nuclear weapons were involved and, Secretary Khrushchev probably nuked Pearl Harbor. Every American should know this. Apparently they all don't, but every American should. By November 5, the attack for Pearl Harbor is approved. Now, the idea is the Japanese have historically launched attacks without a declaration of war. The idea is, you come in, you give just a bare minimum of warning, and then you hit it. To steal a quote from Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, who issues the plans for this, even a samurai will kick the pillow of his adversary before he strikes him. Okay? The idea is that they deliver an ultimatum in Washington that we are in a state of war. Half an hour to an hour later, they attack Pearl Harbor. It's not a sneak attack. It's just a very, very well-planned attack. Now, the task force, Kido Butai, the name for the Japanese main carrier force of 6 fleet carriers, sails on November 6th. For the rest of the month, they are making all sorts of peace overtures. But it's a ruse. It's a ruse to cover that they have already planned to do this. At a certain point, they issue the code name, Climb Mount Nitaka, issuing the go code, basically, to begin the attack. We're at 7:55 in the morning. 350 Japanese planes begin an assault on a fleet on a Sunday morning at a fleet completely unready for war. If you look at this picture taken from a Japanese plane, numbers of B-5N2 Kate torpedo bombers have released their torpedoes, streaking at various targets. If you look, when this photo was stopped, this ship here, the battleship Oklahoma, has already suffered the first of 5 fatal torpedo hits. Right here you can see, where's my mouse, the water spout from a torpedo literally just impacting the side of the battleship West Virginia. And we all know the story of the battleship Arizona. Now, what happens? Okay, 353 planes. We have 8 battleships. This is our Pacific Fleet. They had been moved in November. Okay, the idea is a political symbol. This is our main naval power in the Pacific. We believe the greatest threat is from saboteurs, so the ships here in Battleship Row are parked closely. Aircraft are literally parked wingtip to wingtip to make them easier to guard. What that means, if this plane takes a bomb and explodes, it catches this plane on fire, it explodes, catches this plane on fire, and you just literally destroy an entire squadron. There's no fighter cover. There's no protection. Okay? And so it's a complete shambles. Okay? By the end of it, do I have any more text? Yeah, I do. You know, I'm just, you know what? Never mind the lecture. I'm going to tell you the story. All right? The planes come in. And what happens? They literally simultaneously bomb airfields, hit Battleship Row, hit various other targets. Some planes will even bomb Honolulu. Okay. The West Virginia, here. Where's my mouse? Here. 7 torpedo hits and just sinks. The Oklahoma, which, you know, is the only, it's not the oldest battleship here, but it's the only one different because she and her sister Nevada, you know, here's her sister here. Same class, same design, but this was when the Navy was introducing turbine engines. So the Nevada was built with turbines. The Oklahoma with what were called vertical triple expansion engines. Those big, you know, things that chung, chung, chung. All right. So Oklahoma's engine spaces are huge. Oklahoma takes 5 torpedoes. Those spaces fill out, and she just rolls over and sinks. About 200 to 300 people are trapped inside the battleship when she rolls over, sinks, and settles in the mud of Pearl Harbor. The battleship California up here takes 2 torpedoes and 2 bombs and sinks. We all know the story of Arizona, who takes, some people say she ate a torpedo, 8 bomb hits, one of which crashed into her forward magazine right about here and detonates all of the powder and the explosive shells for her forward 14-inch guns. The battleship is literally rent apart in a huge explosion. I'll post the video because during the attack, a couple of cameras were watching Battleship Row, and you can see the Arizona just explode. The explosion is so powerful that the front foremast just collapses inward. Okay? It's just absolutely devastating. 4 battleships will be sunk. The Nevada is the only one to get underway. She works up enough steam that she can literally back up and then start sailing, trying to escape. The idea is a number of ships try to sortie, get out of the harbor, try to go, find the Japanese fleet. The Japanese see her moving, and they realize as she goes through the narrow channel, if they can sink her there, they will literally ruin Pearl Harbor as a useful naval base. She takes bomb after bomb, torpedo after torpedo, and they have to run her aground. Battleship Row is completely wrecked. This is streaming oil from the Nevada. You can see the rolled over Oklahoma, the sunken West Virginia. Numbers of facilities, dry docks, harbors, hangars destroyed. 350 planes are shot up or destroyed. 2,400 Americans are killed, half of whom from the Arizona, and 1,100 wounded. This is the worst American naval disaster in history. Okay, there's lots of other photos I could show you. You know, I mean, we hear about the Arizona's magazine exploding. The destroyer Shaw took a bomb in her 5-inch magazines and explode. I mean, just huge explosion. 2 other destroyers are so wrecked that when they collapse in each other in dry dock, literally you can't tell that there was a ship there. This is a massive, massive defeat. Now, how does it happen? People, you know, what's the quote that I've been watching From the Earth to the Moon lately, so it is relevant. But Frank Borman said the Apollo 1 fire. Frank Borman was an astronaut. He was one of the 3 to be the first to go around the moon. He said the Apollo 1 disaster happened because of a failure of imagination. We just didn't think it could happen. We knew there was going to be war. There was a war warning issued 1 week before Pearl Harbor. We said that on November 29th, the Japanese were probably going to begin war. but we believe too much in what we call War Plan Orange. Okay, the same thing that this game and others are based on. War Plan Orange, the U.S. Naval War or the U.S. War College War Plan for War in the Pacific, said the Japanese were probably going to invade the Philippines. That's where the war would begin. They would bomb the Philippines. We would then have time to rebuild our ships, and then in that true Alfred Thayer Mahan idea, sail them from Hawaii to Midway to Guam to the Philippines, whereupon they would engage in a gunnery duel with the Japanese fleet and presumably win. Nobody thought the Japanese had the ability to successfully attack Pearl Harbor. There's also the issue along with that, again with this failure of imagination. In the American idea, carriers are toys. Okay, carriers are things used to scout. They're used to find the enemy. It never occurred to anybody in the United States that this was something you could use as a frontline strike weapon. Nobody thought of it. We have tells of what's going on. The Japanese released midget submarines into Pearl Harbor. And outside Pearl Harbor, the destroyer USS Ward, one of those four-stack destroyers, spots what looks like a midget submarine shadowing a ship into Pearl Harbor. It fires on it. It depth charges it. It sinks it. And they radio it in. And the guy in charge of dispatch on Pearl Harbor said, well, I know the commander of that destroyer. It's his first command. He's new. He's only had her for a couple of days. I want confirmation. We knew hours before the attack the Japanese were doing something. But because we didn't know what, because we had no idea, we do not effectively respond. So what that means is by the end of the battle, okay, the Japanese have achieved an amazing victory for the loss of about 26 aircraft. Only a handful of planes get off the ground. Only a handful of ships escape. Okay? The American Pacific Fleet is shattered. But there's a couple of failures. The American carriers in the Pacific, Saratoga's in California, but the two based at Pearl Harbor, Lexington and Enterprise, were at sea, delivering fighters to Wake Island and Midway. In fact, Enterprise arrives later this day. That means how we could effectively respond in this carrier warfare escapes undamaged. The Japanese consider that a failure. They also don't touch the American submarines. They don't touch the oil reserves. What this means is the Japanese leave us only two ways. And what are two ways they leave us? They only leave us two ways to do this. They leave us submarines, and American submarines have the range to go to Japan, and they give us the fuel to be able to do it. What that means is, yes, the loss of the battleships sucks, but the war in the Pacific is not a battleship war. This is not the North Sea between Britain and Germany circa 1916. This is a huge, expansive war where you need things that can fly hundreds of miles an hour, where you can, scout a wide area. This is not going to be a war won by battleships. Pearl Harbor changes our views of naval warfare like that. But the British say, well, no, that was a fluke. Now, never mind the Japanese were inspired, remember, from Toronto. The British say it was a fluke, that, it's impossible to sink a battleship at sea with aircraft. That is, the closest they did is put a torpedo under the rudder of the Bismarck. But days later, okay, if this is December 7, December 10, HMS Prince of Wales and repulsed, the same Prince of Wales that had shot it out with the Bismarck, comprised Force Z. They've been sent to Singapore to kind of near Malaya to beef up British presence in the region. And what happens is Britain declares war. Okay, I should have mentioned. I am getting ahead of the story. After the declaration of Pearl Harbor, or the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Britain declares war before the United States. Britain, supposedly Winston Churchill, on hearing that Pearl Harbor had been bombed by the Japanese, stood up and exclaimed, "Thank God! It means we've won the war." They declare war December 7th. We declare war December 8th. This is when, Roosevelt will, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, who were suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The war is already going badly, but from the British perspective, they've won the war. They declare war on Japan before they are ever attacked as a sign of good faith. And so they send these ships out. And here the British go completely stupid. Because it's a show of force, they have no air cover. The Japanese have amazing aircraft. The G-3M Nell twin-engine bomber and the G-4M Betty have a stupidly long 1,000-mile range. What that means is they can fly from Vietnam down to Malaya and back again with torpedoes. They see these ships. Now, some people had asked Admiral Thomas Phillips, flying his flag here in Prince of Wales, do you want air cover? No. Aircraft can't sink battleships at sea, no. Somebody teased him the day before his deployment that he was an idiot, but so stuck up in his ways that when the first torpedo would hit his ship, he would exclaim, "My God, what a hell of a mine." They laughed. They thought it was funny. Both ships sunk under heavy air attack. They have no fighter escort. They have insufficient anti-aircraft defensive weaponry. And so what we get out of 4C is, this is, repulse, hit, crippled, starting to roll over. They're at the bottom of the Java Sea even today. The Pacific is going to be different. Whereas the naval war in the Atlantic is primarily one of convoys and U-boats. This will be a war of air power. This is going to be a war where it's not a case of who has the fastest ship or who has the biggest guns, but whose fleet has air power, who has air superiority. The 1920s idea of carriers being playthings just evaporates. And so this, is a major change to naval warfare. Now, what we're going to see is if we go back to the southern resource area, here's just a slide for you. But again, oil, tin, rubber, rice. So food, rubber for tires, oil to power stuff, tin to make stuff. Okay. These areas had been lightly defended. This is where, the Dutch East Indies. Well, guess what? Holland had been overrun in 1940 by the Germans. Britain is fighting for its very existence in Africa. It had been in Greece. The Battle of Britain. They don't have stuff to protect Hong Kong or Malaya. The Philippines, we had always seen it as a holding action. That, all we had to do was buy time for a month and a half, and the fleet shows up. We don't have to give them good stuff. And so it's all easily takeable by the Japanese. But there's one critical flaw. And this will be the flaw that from the very beginning dooms the Japanese to defeat. Everything they get from here has to be put on a boat. They've got to ship it. And what that means, if you can interdict that traffic, if you can cut Japan off, then Japan, cannot win the war. They go to war for the resources, but if you can starve out those resources, they will lose the war. It's a rather ironic thing that Großer Admiral Karl Dönitz, the Befehlshaber der U-Booten, or the commander-in-chief of Germany's U-boats, when he's put on trial for the fact that Adolf Hitler named him his successor. For 1 week, he is literally the second Führer of the Nazi Reich. Talking about a shitty job, right? At his trial, they tried to nail him for something. We can't nail him for being the Nazi Führer, so you conducted a blockade, all this, da-da-da. Charles Lockwood, the commander of American submarines, and none other than Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet for the entire war, testified at his trial at Nuremberg and said the Germans did nothing we didn't do. In fact, we did it a hell of a lot better than they did. Britain will see shortages, but Britain will not be threatened overtly by German U-boats. American submarines by 1944 will all but starve out Japan. Because our submarines are longer range, they have more torpedoes, they have, better training. An American submarine, was different, despite the fact they're called pig boats, was different than a surface ship. Why? Air conditioning. You're going to be in this cylindrical hull for a 3-month war patrol. That's going to get stanky in there. There's no shower. All right? You don't get to change all that many clothes. So there's air conditioning. If you're on a surface ship, it's too hot in your cabin, you sleep outside. That's literally what you would do. Now, these submarines are big. They are powerful. They carry 10 an S-boat would have 4 torpedo tubes. A cruiser submarine would have 6 to 8. The older fleet subs would have 8. But ones like this, such as the Triton, the Timber class, would have 10 torpedo tubes. Now, what hampers American subs are twofold. One, we don't have a unified plan of how to use them. We know we want to use them to sink merchant ships, but we don't have a cohesive plan. It's more of a case of go patrol off here and blow up whatever you can. Also, our torpedoes suck. The Mark 14 torpedo is probably the stupidest thing to ever come out of an American factory outside of a Snuggie. All right? That is how bad it is. We're going to see cases of like this, January 22nd. Also, I love American submarines because their commanders could more or less do whatever they want, act with impunity. So there was a case of the USS Sturgeon. Finds, a Japanese merchant ship, fires a couple of torpedoes, hits it, thinks it's sunk it. And so the guy the next day radios in the clear, Sturgeon no longer virgin. And I'm just saying, people were cooler in the 1940s. But here's the irony. He didn't sink the ship. He did not sink it. What happened is the Mark 14 torpedo had a number of stupid design flaws, okay? One, it has a magnetic detonator. Now, this is actually a pretty good idea. The idea, you have a ship, okay? It passes under the ship. It's hard to see because my arm gets... Okay, here's a ship hull, right? It passes under, it picks up the magnetism from the hull, and it explodes. When it explodes, it snaps the spine of the ship, and the ship literally can't support its weight and sinks. That's the hope. But the problem is half the time this thing would run in, pick up the background magnetism from the water, and just explode randomly in what was called a premature detonation. Okay, bad joke. So if it explodes and it's thrusting water up, and it happened prematurely, is that a premature ejaculation? Okay, sorry, bad joke, I just popped in. The other thing, its depth setting thing didn't work. So if you set it, okay, you want, 5 feet depth, okay? If you have a ship in the water, you don't want it to hit at the water line where like a wave might kick it up and it explodes up here. You want to set it, as deep as possible. It would run deep. So if you set it at anything but the water line, it might very well run under the ship. That's bad enough. Sometimes you would get what's called a runaway, where you would fire it and the rudder would jam, and so the torpedo would come out, rotate, and then come back and hit your own sub. There were at least 5 American submarines, or maybe not 5, 2 or 3 for sure, that were sunk by their own torpedoes. Okay, now all of that seems horrible. Then we have one even worse flaw. Half the time the damn thing wouldn't explode, quite literally. There was a case of an American submarine captain who fired a spread of 6 torpedoes at a merchant ship, gets 5 hits. Then he sees the water spouts, but the ship doesn't slow down. So he reloads, fires again, gets about 4 more hits, same thing. Fires from his stern tubes. puts I think it was 18 torpedoes into this ship, and it never slowed down. He takes his last torpedo back. Now, what makes this great is we actually have the records of the Japanese ship when they get it to dry dock, and the captain explains, you literally saw 18 American Mark 14 torpedoes sticking out the side. The thing, half the time, the detonator would not explode unless it was a glancing blow. Then it might detonate. Quite literally, the better a shot you took, you were not guaranteed the thing was going to go off. American submarines don't have reliable torpedoes until 1943, and yet American submarines are able, by tonnage, to sink 3/4 of all Japanese merchant tonnage and 1/2 or more of all Japanese warships. Okay, but understand, these are the problems. We are not ready for war. We've been looking at what's going on, but we have not gotten ready. And so in that same vein, we are terrified of invasion. The army is weak. Okay, we've had the peacetime draft, but it's still not there. Tank-wise, we don't have good tanks beyond the M2A4 and the M3 Stuart. How bad are our tanks? A tank that we still have going around is called the M1 Combat Car. Why is it called the Combat Car? Because Congress did not want to fund a tank, so we had to tell them it was a car with tracks, a turret, and 2 machine guns. We don't have that many, weapons. We don't have that much supplies stocked up. Yes, we have great rifles like the M1 Garand, built 1936, but most of them haven't been built yet. I actually have one in my collection. For those of you that like guns, yes, I gave myself M1 Thumb within 30 minutes of buying it. For those of you that don't know what that is, on the M1 Garand, the standard U.S. rifle of World War II, okay, when you load it, you push a clip down, and when you do, okay, once that's there, as soon as you take off pressure, okay, if you don't have your hand holding the bolt back, the bolt slaps forward. Somebody distracted me. I was like, what? Lifted up my hand, pulled my thumb like that, and it will snap forward, and it will break your thumb. I did that. My dissertation advisor at the time it happened told me that I was an effing idiot. It was amazing. But I have one. By the serial number, it was made approximately 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor. That's in part why I have one. December 1941. The serial number starts at 410,000. Okay, we're quite literally, our army is wearing World War I helmets. We're using World War I 1903 Springfields. We're using World War I Model 1917 machine guns. Okay, this is an army that has, learned the lessons of World War I, seen what's going on in the 20s and 30s, but we are in no way prepared for a modern war. So panic is widespread. Quite literally, the United States Army ran a memo that said if the Japanese were to invade, that the Army could not stop them before Chicago. We were literally going to lose the East Coast of the United States. Hang on, West Coast. Geography is not my strong suit. Now, was this going to happen? No. The Japanese don't have troops for that. Their army is too busy fighting in China. Pearl Harbor was a hit-and-run raid. But unfortunately, and I think this will start because the video is getting a little long. Unfortunately, this is why we get things such as Executive Order 9066. The forced relocation and internment of Japanese Americans into, in effect, concentration camps. Not Arbeitslager, not, death camps or work camps. But, the idea of a concentration camp. You remove a population and concentrate them to make it easier to guard. Burn this into your memories. Burn this into your memories because, this is why Muslims are scared of Donald Trump. This is why Muslims were terrified after 9/11. Because guess what? The government said that this was okay to do. The Supreme Court upheld it. FDR issues this February 1942. And what it says is, 120,000 Americans, not Japanese, but American citizens of Japanese descent have to be forced into these relocation camps. 2/3 were native born. The other were naturalized. Now here's the thing. Here's the thing. Yes, Japanese Americans live in Hawaii. They live all along the West Coast. Hawaii had been what was attacked. This order did not apply to Hawaii. Bear that in mind. How much is this actually for military necessity, fears of invasion, when the place that has been hit and the place that per capita has the highest Japanese American population is exempted from this? Bear that in mind. So what happens? They get rounded up. They post notices. They give them a few days to leave. You don't get to sell your house. You don't get to sell your stuff. Quite literally, whatever you could carry is what you got. Your house, everything would be then confiscated by the government and sold off. You were then forced to board a train where you would arrive at a camp where, yes, American Army soldiers guarded you. That machine gun is not pointed outwards. This is not for your protection. There's camps in California, some in Idaho, Utah, Arizona, even as far away as Arkansas. You guys know Star Trek, George Takei, Mr. Sulu. He grew up in one of these camps. This is an absolutely horrible thing. Now, by 1943-44, you could obtain release from these camps if you pledged to move to the East Coast, move away from the West Coast. There's going to be some guys that will be allowed to form a battalion of infantry, but they're sent to Europe because we don't trust them to use in the Pacific. Property would be confiscated, and only very occasionally would it actually be returned. Now here's where it gets really bad. I've got a number of friends that have tried to say, well, look, this was a military necessity. It was needed. We won the war. This was not a military necessity. These guys were not spies. Many of these were children. This was pure racism. Japs keep moving. This is a white man's neighborhood. We don't want any Japs back here, ever. Some of it's influenced by fear. When you get things like the battle for Los Angeles in 1942, when an American submarine literally shells parts of Los Angeles. Some of that contributes to the fear. But if you look, this is just what happens when propaganda runs amok. Look at this propaganda from, World War II. Things like, let's catch him with his panzers down. There's Hitler and Hitler's butt and underwear. You're welcome. Let's catch him with his panzers down. Or Tokyo kids say, good material waste and scrap. Help the saving face for Jap. Look at the difference. How is Hitler portrayed? The buffoon. But the Japanese guy has the buck teeth, the fangs, the pointy ears, the devil's ears. Sure, you might get things such as, I'll carry mine too. Why? Because rubber's at a premium. But I mean, this is the gamut of propaganda. Some other propaganda just, to lighten things up. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. I don't know why Hitler looks like Wonder Woman's airplane, but there you go. Or Superman. War savings bonds and stamps do the job on the Japanazis. I have a PhD. I don't know what the hell a Japanazi is. I don't think Japanese people are Aryan, so I don't know. Or this is where we're going to get the birth of Captain America. But what you can see, why can you have something like Executive Order 9066, people losing their heads? Fear, racism, Pearl Harbor. And again, you can see, you'll see it in all of this stuff. And the propaganda and the cartoons and things like that. And it's along with that, I'll post your extra credit assignment. I'll do a separate video. But what I'd like you to do for your first extra credit assignment for this class is I'm going to have you watch some World War II cartoons. A couple dealing with the Germans. A few dealing with the Japanese. And you're going to see that the Germans might be portrayed as stupid or overbearing or authoritarian. But the Japanese, it's very racist. All sorts of stereotypes. And it's because of a society imbued with that racism. That's how you can get something like Executive Order 9066. So I'm sorry the lecture ran a little long. I didn't even get as far as I wanted. Still got about 8 more slides, but I figure it's about time to cut it off. So we'll stop here. We'll pick up with the Philippines and such next time, and we'll kind of deal with 1942 in the Pacific next time. I'll record a video about your extra credit, post that. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know if there's anything I can do. And we will see you in the next video. Have a good one, guys.